It was supposed to be just another late-night interview, until a single joke about her hair turned into a national moment no one saw coming. When Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett walked onto the Late Show stage, she expected to talk policy, not, defend her humanity in front of millions. The backstage of the Late Show was a strange kind of quiet. Not silent. There were always the low murmurs of producers, the static hiss of earpieces, the occasional clang of a coffee cup on metal. But, to Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, it all faded into one low hum, like a distant engine running under her skin. Her stylist gave her curls one last spray. Someone handed her a glass of water she didn't ask for. She barely blinked. She had done this before, talk shows, town halls, debates. But tonight felt different. Maybe it was the exhaustion from a week of hearings. Maybe it was that subtle gnawing feeling in her gut, the one she learned never to ignore. Or maybe it was just the way Stephen Colbert's name looked on the teleprompter, bright, bold, and ever so slightly threatening. They called her name. The audience clapped. She smiled, but behind that smile was steel. As she stepped onto the stage, the lights hit her like a flashbang. The set was cheerful and familiar, a mock living room with chairs too low and applause signs too loud. Colbert greeted her with a wide grin, that signature posture that danced between satire and sincerity. The crowd erupted as she waved, her heels echoing against the stage floor like a drumbeat. She crossed her legs, adjusted her blazer, and exhaled. Showtime. The first few minutes were exactly what she expected. Safe questions about policy, harmless banter about working in Congress, polite applause where it belonged. Then came the pivot. So, quick, she almost missed it. You're probably the only member of Congress, Colbert chuckled, whose hair could get more attention than their policy. The studio laughed, but Jasmine didn't. Her face remained neutral, her eyes scanning his with a stillness that said more than 1,000 retorts ever could. There it was, the joke, the one that always came, not always from talk show hosts. Sometimes it came from colleagues, sometimes from donors, sometimes from strangers who thought they were being clever. She had rehearsed responses in her head. Before, funny comebacks, elegant redirects, firm but fair corrections. But tonight, none of those felt right. The audience laughter faltered, thinning like air in a vacuum, and in that moment, Jasmine made a decision. Not to clap back, not to perform, but to speak like the woman her grandmother raised, clear, grounded, and unshakably whole. "Stephen," she said, her voice low and steady, "black women in Congress don't get the luxury of separating how we look from what we say." The room froze. For exactly 2 seconds, no one moved. The audience, so quick to laugh, to cheer, to react, suddenly felt like a gallery frozen in oil paint. You could hear someone cough in the back row. The band stopped shifting in their seats. Even Colbert, master of the snappy comeback, leaned ever so slightly forward. His smile faltered, not from offense, but from the rare electric jolt of being unprepared. Jasmine didn't fill the silence. She let it breathe, let it settle like dust in the glare of the overhead lights. She knew what she had done. She had taken the moment back, not just for herself, but for every black woman who had ever smiled through a veiled jab and told themselves not to make it awkward. "I don't get to choose when my hair is just hair," she continued, not with anger, but with the clarity of lived truth. "It's a political statement whether I like it or not. It's a distraction when I speak too passionately. It's a punchline when I'm too quiet. And on nights like this, it's a prop." Colbert blinked. Something in his posture shifted, from late-night comedian to witness. "It's not just about a joke," she added. "It's about the thousands of times I've had to prove that I belong in rooms I already walked into." Her voice never rose. That was the most disarming part. No fire, no venom. Just words shaped by years of navigating spaces that demanded her excellence but couldn't handle her presence. Behind the camera, a producer whispered something into a headset. Someone else silently gestured to cut to commercial. But Colbert raised a hand. No, not yet. Jasmine looked out toward the audience. Not at them, but through them. Past the rows of bright eyes and into the invisible crowd behind the cameras, the girls watching from dorm rooms, the mothers folding laundry, the workers scrolling on break. The ones who knew exactly what it felt like to be laughed at and not. "Find it funny. I didn't come here to make anyone uncomfortable," she said. "But I won't shrink to keep anyone comfortable either." That was the line, the kind that doesn't end when the cameras cut. The applause had barely faded before the first text came through. Not from friends, not from family, from Washington. Jasmine glanced at her phone backstage, expecting the usual words, "You killed it," or "legendary." But instead it read, "Don't go back out there. They're already framing this." No name, just the message. Her stomach dropped. In the makeup room, the silence was deafening. Her staffers avoided her eyes, scrolling through their feeds like they were watching a slow-motion car crash. On screen, clips of the moment were already looping, dissected in real time. One right-wing commentator tweeted, "Another race-baiting performance from the woke elite." Another said, "Congrats, Colbert just got canceled in his own house." But it wasn't the critics Jasmine worried about. It was the silence from her own party. The ones who called her a rising star yesterday were suddenly nowhere to be found today. No retweets, no public support. Just silence, and that was louder than the hate. She stepped into the hallway and called her mother. No answer. Called her chief of staff. Voicemail. For a second, she felt like that same little girl from Dallas. Again, fresh from a school suspension for talking back to a teacher who called her hair distracting. The world hadn't changed. It had just gotten better at disguising the punishment. Then came the email. Subject: Media Inquiry. Statement on Crockett appearance. It wasn't from the Late Show. It was from her own communications team. They were preparing a statement. Apologetic, carefully worded, designed to pacify donors and distance the party from misinterpreted commentary. Jasmine felt something inside her crack. Not break, but shift. If she signed off on that statement, the message would be clear. Next time, smile and let the joke slide. But if she refused, the cost would be real. Endorsements, committee seats, her re-election campaign. She stared at the draft email, hands trembling, and then she hit delete. She picked up her phone, opened Twitter, and typed slowly, deliberately, "I will not apologize for existing. I will not soften the truth to keep the peace. If that costs me power, so be it. I didn't run for Congress to be palatable. I ran to be heard." Within minutes, the post exploded. And so did the threats. The threats started predictably. Anonymous emails, burner Twitter accounts, voicemails thick with static and venom. "Go back to doing your hair, not politics. We'll make sure you don't last another term." But within 24 hours, it escalated. A photo of her townhouse in D.C. was posted online, the caption ominous. "We know where the problem lives." That night, Jasmine didn't sleep. Her security detail doubled. Police cars patrolled the block, lights off, engines idling like predators in the dark. But the real storm wasn't outside. It was in the halls of power. Behind closed doors, her own party was strategizing damage control. Caucus leaders whispered about her being a liability in swing states. A senior senator allegedly said, "We can't have this kind of heat right now. We're already bleeding moderates." Another comment leaked, "She's brave, but reckless." Jasmine sat in on a video call with her team, a digital room full of tight smiles and measured voices. One advisor said, "We're proud of what you said, Congresswoman, but now we pivot. Let's refocus the narrative. Talk economy, jobs, housing. Let's move on." Move on? She wanted to scream, to ask why she had to move on when it was his joke. Why the burden of professionalism, forgiveness, and maturity always fell on the shoulders of those hurt most. Instead, she simply said, "You want me to stop the fire, but you won't admit something's burning." That line was quoted in a New York Times op-ed the next morning. Suddenly, Jasmine wasn't just a politician. She was a symbol. And symbols are dangerous because they can't be controlled. Some liberal commentators championed her as the voice Gen Z was waiting for. Conservative pundits painted her as a threat to institutional decorum. But beneath the noise was something deeper, quieter, and more dangerous. The machine had turned. Committee invitations were quietly rescinded. A major donor canceled a scheduled fundraiser, citing unforeseen scheduling issues. One of her own mentors stopped returning her calls. And still, she didn't regret a word. Because for the first time, she realized the real threat wasn't what she had said. It was that she had said it on camera, unapologetically, unedited, without the filter they all depended on, and they were terrified. Jasmine knew the hardest part wasn't the threats. It wasn't the public scrutiny or even the political fallout. The real weight was the isolation that followed, the cold, invisible distance that crept between her and those who once claimed to stand by her. At first, it was subtle. A colleague who avoided eye contact, a text that went unanswered, a voicemail that never returned. Then it grew louder, more obvious. The invites to speak at events stopped. The handshakes at meetings grew stiff, like she was radioactive. The look in people's eyes. They no longer saw Jasmine, Congresswoman from Texas, the bold advocate for policy change. They saw the woman who had dared to confront the powerful, to challenge the status quo in front of millions, and to do so unapologetically. Her phone buzzed again. It was an email from an unknown address, the subject line simple, "You don't belong." Jasmine stared at it for a long moment. She'd heard whispers in the halls of Congress. But this email, it was different. It wasn't just criticism. It was a threat to her existence in the very place she fought to change. It spoke the unspoken truth. To challenge the establishment was to risk being erased, but Jasmine wasn't one to be erased. She drafted a response in her mind, but when she tried to type it out, her hands hesitated. For the first time, doubt crept in. What if they were right? What if she had pushed too far, made herself too visible, too controversial? She pushed those thoughts away. In a moment of clarity, Jasmine realized the people who mattered were the ones who believed in the cause, not in her image, not in her popularity. They believed in the power of truth, and no amount of isolation, no matter how deep, could silence that. The public side of her life was a stage, and on it, the script was constantly being rewritten. The real battle was behind closed doors, where only the few who dared to join her in her struggle would ever truly understand. The next day, Jasmine stepped into the office of a fellow Congresswoman, someone who had been in politics for decades, someone who had once been a mentor. "You did the right thing," the woman said, her voice softer than Jasmine had expected. "But you need to understand something. When you're in the arena, you have to be prepared for the cost. It's not just your policies they come after, it's you, and it's going to be lonely." The words were harsh, but honest. Jasmine nodded, but deep down, she knew she wasn't ready to back down. The quiet of isolation wasn't enough to extinguish her fire, and she would not let them strip her of the power that lay in her voice. The pressure was starting to feel unbearable. Jasmine had become a target in ways she hadn't anticipated, not just from the media, but from people she had once called allies. In the halls of Congress, whispers had turned into full-blown conversations behind her back. Some were offering words of encouragement, but they were rare, almost drowned out by the louder voices of doubt and disapproval. But the breaking point came unexpectedly, on a day that started like any other. It was an early morning session, one of those marathon, Committee meetings where everyone sat at long tables pretending to care about the endless list of bills and proposals that were being read aloud. Jasmine sat in her usual spot, a row of empty chairs around her. No one had bothered to sit beside her for weeks. It was as if her presence in the room was a reminder of something uncomfortable, a truth they didn't want to acknowledge. She scribbled notes, her mind drifting, when she felt a tap on her shoulder. Turning, she saw a senior congressman, someone she had worked with for years. His face was tight, the usual smile replaced by a somber expression. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. Jasmine's gut twisted. She nodded, pushing her chair back. They stepped outside, into the hallway where the noise from the chambers didn't quite reach. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice low but steady. She could already sense the tone wasn't one of support. "You know that thing you did on the Late Show? The whole hair comment?" He paused, his eyes scanning the empty hallway as if he was afraid someone would overhear. Jasmine raised an eyebrow, her posture straightening. "I don't regret it. You don't have to like it. But it's the truth that's been ignored for years." He shook his head, glancing down the hallway again. "That's the problem. You're making enemies, Jasmine. Big ones. People who matter." His voice dropped to a near whisper. "You've become a target, and not just for the right wing. You've alienated people in your own party. They think you're playing a game, trying to make a name for yourself." Jasmine's heart sank. She'd known that people were talking about her behind closed doors, but hearing it from someone she respected stung. "And now they're calling for your head," he continued. "There's pressure to push you out, to make you irrelevant. You've become a liability." The word hit her like a punch to the gut. A liability. That's what they thought of her now. The woman who had spent years fighting for justice, for truth, for those who didn't have a voice. And now, she was just another politician in their eyes, a liability to be disposed of. Jasmine's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "I won't back down. If they want me gone, they're going to have to take me down. But I'm not going quietly." The congressman's eyes softened, but there was no sympathy in them. Only resignation. "Just be careful, Jasmine. There's more at play here than you realize." The words echoed in her head as she walked back into the chamber. The weight of what had just been said hung over her like a storm cloud. She had always known politics was a game of power, but now she saw just how far people would go to protect their own interests, even at the cost of truth. As she returned to her seat, Jasmine glanced around at the faces of her colleagues, the same people who had stood beside her just a few months ago. Now, they avoided her gaze, too afraid to make eye contact, too uncertain to stand in solidarity. But it didn't matter. Jasmine had already made her decision. The world may have turned its back on her, but she was done trying to please the ones who had never believed in her from the start. She would keep pushing, keep fighting. If she had to burn every bridge to expose the truth, so be it. The weeks that followed felt like a blur of chaos and quiet determination. Jasmine had become an icon, but not in the way she'd imagined. Her name was on the lips of millions, but it wasn't always in the context of praise. The media had polarized her. Some celebrated her courage, while others questioned her motives, accusing her of turning her struggle into a spectacle. But the truth, her truth, was far more complicated than any headline could capture. Jasmine knew she had become more than just a politician. She was now a symbol of defiance, a target for the powerful, but also a beacon for those who had been silenced for too long. And in the midst of the storm, she found something she never expected: solidarity. One night, as she sat in her office after a long day of meetings, the phone rang. It was an unlisted number, but Jasmine had learned by now that those were the calls she needed to answer. "Jasmine," a voice said on the other end, "it's Maria. I need you to listen carefully." Maria was a close ally, someone Jasmine trusted implicitly. The kind of person who had been with her through thick and thin. Jasmine leaned forward, her heart racing. "What's going on?" "There's a vote coming up, a critical one. It's a chance for us to push through some real policy changes, but there's a catch. The leadership is making deals behind the scenes, deals that will sell out your position, your voice." Jasmine's stomach turned. The leadership had never been on her side, but this felt like the final betrayal. "They think you'll fold," Maria continued. "They think you'll back down when they put the pressure on you. But I'm telling you, Jasmine, they're underestimating you. They're betting on your silence." Jasmine gripped the edge of her desk, her knuckles turning white. The choice had never been clearer. This was her moment, not just for herself, but for every person who had supported her, who had believed in the change she was trying to bring. "I'm not backing down," Jasmine said, her voice steady, almost cold. "Tell the team I'm all in. We fight this, no matter what." Maria paused, then spoke with a fierceness Jasmine hadn't heard before. "This is it, Jasmine. You're the only one who can make them listen. This vote will either silence you or ignite a revolution, and you have to choose what you're willing to lose." Jasmine hung up the phone and stared out the window. The city lights flickered in the distance, a constant reminder of how small her fight seemed in the grand scheme of things. But to her, it was everything. She knew what was at stake. If she didn't act now, the consequences would be dire. Her career, her integrity, and everything she'd worked for could be destroyed. But at the same time, this was the chance to make history, to stand firm, not just for herself, but for all the people who had been dismissed, silenced, and ignored by the system. The next day, Jasmine walked onto the house floor with a fire in her eyes. She wasn't just there to vote. She was there to make a statement. She had come to realize that her voice wasn't just a tool for politics. It was a weapon, a force that could shake the very foundations of the system. The room was buzzing with tension. People glanced at her, whispering among themselves, clearly unsure of what she would do. Jasmine didn't care. She walked with purpose, her every step echoing in the silence that had fallen over the chamber. As the vote approached, the Speaker of the House called the room to order. There were hushed conversations, deals being made in low voices, but Jasmine stood tall, her gaze unwavering. When her name was called, Jasmine stepped forward and cast her vote. It wasn't just a vote. It was a declaration, a statement that she would not be cowed, that she would not be controlled, that she would fight until the very end for what she believed in. And as she turned to leave, she felt something shift. The weight of the moment settled in her chest, but there was no fear, only the certainty that she had made the right choice. In the days that followed, the outcome of the vote was revealed, but it wasn't the result that would define Jasmine's legacy. It was the way she had fought, the way she had refused to back down even when everything seemed stacked against her. The world had been watching, waiting to see if she would crumble. But Jasmine had proven that even in the face of overwhelming pressure, she could stand tall. And her actions sparked something much bigger than just a political battle. It sparked a movement. Young women, people of color, and those who had long been forgotten by the system took to the streets, inspired by her courage. They rallied behind her, not just as a congresswoman, but as a symbol of resistance against a system that had silenced them for far too long. Jasmine Crockett had become more than just a politician. She had become a voice for the voiceless, a force to be reckoned with in a world that had never truly heard her. And this was only the beginning. Jasmine's journey was far from over, but her fight had already changed the course of history. The path ahead would be filled with more battles, more setbacks, but also more triumphs. Because when you stand for what's right, the world will eventually listen. What do you think? Should we always speak up, no matter the consequences? What do you think Jasmine's next move should be? Share your thoughts below.